Hello everyone and welcome back to another Star Wars The Black Series action figure review. Today we're taking a look at the Imperial Armoured Commando from Star Wars The Mandalorian, and I'm really happy to finally have this character in the collection. As soon as I saw these troopers on screen in Season 3, I knew that I wanted to own this in action figure form. It's a really cool trooper design. It's, for the time being at least, the closest we're probably going to get to those Imperial Mandalorians from Star Wars Rebels that were led by Gar Saxon, and it's just one of those characters that, like I said, when it popped up on screen, I knew I needed to own an action figure of it. So when Hasbro announced this one, I was more than thrilled. The figure itself is decent. I'm not going to go overboard on this one and say that it's absolutely flawless, because it isn't. It does have a couple of issues and we'll touch base on those throughout this review, but purely from an aesthetic standpoint, this is a great addition to the collection. Really does look cool, has some great features, and we're going to dive into all of those in just a little bit. As always, if you'd like to add this one to your own collection, there is a link down below in the video description that will take you to staractionfigures.co.uk, and at the time of filming this review, the Imperial Armoured Commando is in stock and available to buy. So without further ado, let's kick things off, and as always, we'll start this review by taking a look at the packaging that the Armoured Commando comes in. So once again, nothing too exciting going on with the packaging itself. This figure does come in the standard Black Series style box. We do have the copper colour band around the edge of the box indicating that this figure is from The Mandalorian. We have the number in the series and name of the character just up the side of the window, and down the spine this really cool image of the Imperial Armoured Commando himself, looking very, very cool indeed. On the back we have that image once again, accompanied by a brief description of the character and the continuation of the colour band. As you can see, this is number 42 in the Mandalorian series from the Black Series 6-inch line, and it's crazy to think that there's been that many figures from this show in the Black Series line so far. My shelf is starting to get a little bit packed, and as such I'll probably be cutting down and probably prioritising vintage collection Mandalorian characters going forward, just to free up that space on the shelf. But like I said, packaging wise, pretty standard stuff, nothing really to write home about, but the figure inside is a decent addition to the collection. So let's jump into this review and take a look at him. So here we have the Imperial Armoured Commando out of the box and ready for battle, and I'm going to touch base on the issues with this figure first, because I don't like to spend too long talking about the negatives with these figures, but I feel like this one definitely needs addressing. For the most part, visually it's a great looking figure, it looks really cool on the shelf, and I love the armour design. But this is one of the first Black Series figures that I've found suffers from the removal of certain articulation points, particularly the thigh swivel and the swivel at the bicep. Now, you can still get this figure in some really cool poses, but unfortunately the removal of those swivel points does stop you from getting this figure in certain poses, which is a little bit of a shame. It's not so much an issue if you're going to have this figure stood at attention on the shelf, but if you want to pose your figures a little bit more dynamically, it does become a bit of a problem. And the figure itself, it doesn't really appear this way on camera, but he's a little bit bow-legged, and that partly is due, in my opinion, to the removal of that thigh swivel. Now, I'm not that overly bothered about the removal of those articulation points. I know a lot of people within the community have sort of criticised it, but for me, I don't mind it too much. I've certainly not noticed it as a detriment to any of the figures that I've picked up recently, but this one definitely suffers from it. Like I said, visually, it looks fantastic, but the removal of those articulation points does create a little bit of a hindrance when getting this figure in certain poses, particularly if sort of you want to display this figure on his knee, on one knee, sorry, holding the blaster, you know, stuff like that. Little poses are just a little bit more tricky to get into with this figure, just because of those articulation points being taken away. But for the most part, like I said, it's a really cool looking figure. It looks great on the shelf, and I love the armour design. So let's jump into it and take a look at some of the finer details of this figure. So with regards to the overall look of the character and the figure, I absolutely love this one. Like I said at the start of the review, as soon as these guys showed up in The Mandalorian Season 3, I knew I needed to own action figures of them, and Hasbro for the most part delivered with this one. You can definitely see the influence of Ralph McQuarrie in certain elements of the design. The chest armour in particular definitely has elements and hints of Ralph's concept designs for Boba Fett. There's certainly some inspiration there from the Ralph McQuarrie Stormtrooper design as well. And again, like I said at the start of the review, you can definitely see the influence of the Imperial Mandalorians we saw in Star Wars Rebels as well. And for the time being at least, this is the closest we're probably going to get to having those characters represented in our Black Series collections. But yeah, I really do like the design on this one, and the way in which Hasbro have executed it for the most part is really, really nice. The helmet looks really cool, despite, in my opinion, being a little bit underscaled. He does suffer from what I like to call pinhead syndrome, in the sense that the helmet looks a little bit small. It isn't removable, and there's no head sculpted underneath, which probably contributes to the size issue of the helmet. When I've looked at images of this character online just to compare it to how the figure looks, it doesn't look too different to what we actually see on screen. But just as an action figure, if that helmet were to be removable, the head underneath would be really, really small. So that's worth pointing out. But again, not a major detriment to the figure. The helmet is still really nicely sculpted. Painted reasonably well. There are a few sort of misalignments and chipping and all that sort of stuff on my sample, at least on my copy. But for the most part, looks really cool. I love these grey flashes down the side of the helmet. The faceplate itself is definitely very Mandalorian-like, but also has some hints of the First Order in there as well. I love the gloss finish on the armour. That looks really, really nice. The jumpsuit underneath looks really cool. You've got these Mandalorian-inspired gauntlets on the figure as well. Little panels and doodads on the chest plate there. The belt looks really cool. You've got the holster there, which can store the blaster pistol, which we'll take a look at in just a bit. And yeah, for the most part, like I said, visually, it's a really cool looking figure. I absolutely love the design of this character, and I would not be too opposed to army building this one. I think I'll probably do that in the vintage collection scale though, just because I'm starting to run out of room, as I said, on my Black Series Mandalorian shelf, and the vintage collection version of this character looks absolutely stunning. It's a deluxe release and comes with tons of accessories, and as soon as that figure gets released, I will be picking it up. And I'll probably review it for you as well, which is probably going to come as a shock to some, because this channel is primarily focused on the Black Series these days. But when Hasbro knock it out of the park with the vintage collection, I do like to give the devil its due. So when that figure does come out, I'll certainly look to pick it up and review it for you. With regards to accessories, this figure does come with a blaster rifle, which looks very, very cool in terms of its design. Again, there is certain inspiration there from previous Imperial weapons. It definitely looks like an E11 in the sort of midsection there, but the barrel has been extended, as has the stock. It's very similar in a lot of ways to the Death Trooper blaster, and also the one included with the Mountain Trooper from Galaxy's Edge. There are some differences, but just in terms of its overall look, it's very, very similar. He does come with a blaster pistol as well, and we'll get a look at that later on in the review. And he does come as well with a removable jetpack. Now, what's really, really cool about this is the fact that you can recreate a vintage collection figure release in the Black Series line without having to buy an individual figure, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. But yeah, really, really nicely sculpted, really nicely painted backpack, and like I said, it can be removed, so we'll take a look at that in just a bit. Now, with regards to the rest of the articulation on this figure, I know we touched base on it a little bit earlier on, just about those removal or the removal of those articulation points within the arms and the legs. But the rest of the figure, nicely sculpted for the most part. Like I said, he does come with a decent range of movement. We have a ball joint at the head. Like I said, no removable helmet on this one, but we do have the standard barbell joint in the sense that the head is articulated and so is the neck. So you get a really nice fluid range of movement there. We have butterfly joints as standard at the shoulders, hinges at the elbows, and swivels at the forearms. We have hinges at the wrists and a nice fluid ball joint at the torso. That chest piece is a separate overlay like with most trooper designs, so that doesn't hinder any of the articulation in the chest, which is good. We also have ball jointed hips as well, as you can see, and we also have hinged knees and ankles as well with the rocker joint. So like I said, the removal of the swivel thighs and swivel biceps is a little bit of an issue with this figure if you want to get him in certain poses, but like I said, for the most part, you can still pose him up pretty well. Get him in battle ready poses, action stances, and he does look very, very cool as part of the shelf. Now, as I said, he does come with the blaster pistol as well, which, as you can see, is a pretty simplistic design. Very Mandalorian in its overall design, but with those elements of the Imperial aesthetic in there as well. Pretty nice sculpt, but minimal paint applications. But the blaster itself, as I said, can be removed from the hand of the figure, and then you can proceed to store that away inside the holster that's attached to his belt. You've got the strap mechanism going on there, which once released allows you to store the blaster pistol away like so. It's pretty cool stuff. And like I said, what's really cool about the removable jetpack is if you've picked up the most recent release of The Mandalorian, which I have reviewed, and I invite you to go and check out that video if you haven't done so already, then you can actually take the backpack from Din Djarin, remove it with a little bit of difficulty, and you can actually replace it with the backpack of the Imperial Armoured Commando. So not only can you recreate the scene from the Mandalorian series itself, but you can also recreate that recent vintage collection release in 6-inch form, which is really, really cool. And if you've picked up this figure or the Mines of Mandalore version that comes with the plastic cape, I'd probably display the Mines of Mandalore version with the jetpack that he comes with, and then display this figure with the Imperial Armoured Commando jetpack, just because the Mines of Mandalore version comes with the plastic cape and is obviously a little bit trickier to display with the backpack. But this looks really, really cool. Obviously, it's aided by the soft goods cape, and it just creates a little bit of variety in your display. And if you're looking for something that's really scene specific, then this is a really, really cool little feature. And I love that Hasbro made the pegs and the sockets for this jetpack the same size on both figures. That's a really, really cool touch and a really nice feature with the Imperial Armoured Commando. So that concludes this review on the Imperial Armoured Commando from the Black Series 6-inch line. Once again, for the most part, a really cool addition to the collection and to the line itself. If you're a fan of Troopers, if you're a fan of Imperials and Mandalorians, then this is definitely a figure worth considering adding to the collection. And if you want to add one to your own, as always, there is a link down below in the video description. As I said, I am a little bit biased towards this one just because I absolutely love the overall design, but I can't award full marks to this figure, unfortunately, just because I do feel like it suffers from the removal of those thigh and bicep articulation points. The head is a little bit small, but that's an issue I can overlook. But one other slight problem I've noticed with this figure, and I forgot to mention it earlier on in the video, is the fact that the left hand of this figure doesn't feature a trigger finger, which prevents you from displaying this guy with both weapons in both hands at the same time. I'm not really sure why Hasbro made that decision with this figure, considering they've made steps to include that on recent Clone Trooper releases. Not entirely sure why they didn't apply it to this figure, but be that as it may, it's not a detriment to the figure as such, but it is worth pointing out. But the figure does receive a couple of extra points just due to that feature of being able to swap out the jetpack with the recent release of The Mandalorian. I think that's a really, really cool touch, and it's almost enough to make me consider wanting to buy duplicates of both of these figures, but I'm probably not going to do that, not until they hit deep clearance. But I'll definitely be troop building this figure in the vintage collection. I can't wait for that deluxe release, and like I said, if and when I pick up that figure, I will be sure to review it for you. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back with some more very soon. Until then, as always, thank you for watching, keep collecting, and until next time, may the Force be with you.